We have two speakers today. James Owen to my immediate left is an attorney, he's the executive director of Indy, Missouri, and his former public counsel for Missouri Public Service Commission. And then further left is Karl Zobrist. He also an attorney, practices energy law, and he's former chairman. So Brent suggested that maybe I offer, one question, and of course, both of you, I think it was right here. If there are maybe you want to walk this through, I don't know. The question is really simple. This is Independence currently has this reason. How does life look and feel differently for the customers? If it goes, customers here, their residents say we own it, we pay bills. So we have the two sides of the coin. How does life look different if you go from to the restaurant before we come to
well, one, let me just thank everybody. I just want to appreciate you coming, taking interest in this issue. I think it's really important. I think electricity is one of those things that people don't think much about, unless like they get their bill and they get mad about that, or they turn on a light switch and it doesn't come on and they want it to be fixed. So I think being informed and having information about that is really important. Like right now, you live in the city of Independence. You buy your power from Independence Power and Light. The way we have it set up in Missouri is that utility companies are given the ability by the government to serve one area, a geographical area, and they are responsible, or they have involvement with the generation, which is making the power, the transmission, which is moving the power, or the distribution, which is the delivery of power to your home or business. Right now, your city council oversees and regulates when rates go up, how that power gets made, how it gets delivered to you. If you were in Evergy service territory, which isn't that very far from here, it might just be a matter of blocks from here. I mean, essentially, Evergy, as opposed to being owned by the city, as opposed to being owned by citizens, it is an investor-owned utility. That's the phrase we use in this world. It means that shareholders buy into it. They provide the capital for it, and that private company provides power for its service territory. Evergy provides it almost for the entirety of the rest of the Kansas City metro area, as well as a big chunk of western Missouri, as well as eastern Kansas. And because they are a private company that does that, they have agreed in exchange for being able to be the provider of power for that area. They are going to be regulated by an entity called the Public Service Commission, which is in charge of making sure that utility services provided by private companies stay reliable to the citizens of the state of Missouri. And so ultimately, if this were to switch, if Independence were under a privately owned business, you would have to really rely on how the Public Service Commission makes decisions on that on your behalf, as opposed to your city council, and that would be the big difference.
I think that's right. The other thing that I would just talk a little bit about is who are the regulators. The Missouri Public Service Commission is 5 people appointed by the governor of Missouri. It's not an elected position. Typically, it's been, at least when I was there back in the 90s, we had lawyers, economists, and civil servants. And now you have ex-politicians. And I won't say that's good or that's bad, because I did serve with 2 former members of the House of Representatives. They were good commissioners. But now I think they all are, except for the new commissioner, Commissioner Hahn, who was on Governor Parsons' staff. And there are some of us who kind of wish that we had people that had more professional background in the production of either electricity or telecoms or natural gas or something, and that more professional experience to some degree, or at least related. Missouri has very strict conflict of interest rules. So, for example, when I left the commission, I began to do work as a private lawyer, and I do work now for Evergy, and I also do work for certain other utilities. But there's no way that the Senate would confirm me, because my relationship with Evergy or with the grid operator in Eastern Missouri called Mid-Continent ISO, because they would view me as having a potential conflict. So That's one of the problems with the commission. You get people that may not have the expertise when they first go on there. And then when everybody gets educated and so forth, and go out in private practice or just private industry, you probably can't come back. So that's one of the you know, pluses and minuses of that. One of the pluses that I think about being a regulated investor of utility is that you've got a whole bunch of watchdogs looking over your operations. Primarily the staff of the Missouri Public Service Commission, which is about 150, 200. I mean, lawyers, accountants, auditors, and engineers that take a look at what you do. You also have the Office of the Public Counsel, which, just to correct you, it's not part of the commission. It is an independent body set up by statute. And a lot of times, the Public Counsel doesn't agree with what the staff of the commission wants to do, because the staff of the commission technically reports to the commissioners themselves. But they can't mess when you've got a pending case. That would disqualify commissioners doing that. The other thing is that an investor-owned utility like Evergy or Ameren, or it's now called Liberty Utilities, used to be Empire District out of Joplin, they have to, you know, go to the commission to do almost anything significant, whether it's to raise rates, whether it's to merge with another utility, whether it's to build a new plant or to acquire a plant. So, I mean, it's heavy duty regulation. In my opinion, it's far more, the states have far more authority over local utilities than, say, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has over, you know, power electric producers and natural gas producers. So those are just a couple of things that I would put in perspective. Because, you know, I'm not an expert on, I know about municipal utilities. I have allied myself with them as an investor and utility lawyer on certain cases. Sometimes we fight with communities, and sometimes we fight with the co-ops. And when I fight, I don't mean these aren't nasty.
Adversarial.
Yeah, it's adversarial. It's essentially about money. Luckily, you know, nobody is physically harmed by these things. Although you have the reliability issues that we're facing this week. If you've been reading the paper, Southwest Power Pool is now in conservative operations through Friday, which is one level below or one level above the emergency alerts, when they start saying you need to start turning off your lights because everybody's lights may go on. So we're right there. The only good news about this week is that the knew it was coming, and utilities appear to be well prepared. So it's not like Winter Storm Uri or Winter Storm Elliott, which was only active about a day and a half. Nobody saw that drop in the power. You remember a year ago, this last. James, what do you want to ask?
Oh no, I was going to say something. You know, I was wanting to ask you, Karl. Do you think with the composition of Public Service Commission, that the fact that we have term limits now in the legislature, do you think that's had some influence on the fact that we have more former lawmakers on there, because it's kind of seen as extending your time in Jeff City?
I mean, everybody thought, and I was one of them, the term limits would be good because, you know, we used to have state senators and state reps that would be there for decades. And some of them were good, and some of them were like, oh my gosh, you know. The other problem is because you have term limits for House members, where do they go? They go to the Senate.
Yeah.
Then you have term limits for the senators, where do they go? They go to the boards and commissions.
Public Service Commission.
Well, among other things, they go to the Labor and Industrial Relations Commission, they go to the Tax Commission. They typically do not go back and earn a living in private enterprise.
Yeah, you don't have a lot of Cincinnati. I forget it.
North Washington, Cincinnati.
Yeah, sorry, come on. I was trying to be so fancy.
Washington started.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the correction. That was an important distinction. And I kind of reached it short on that. Public Service, Office of Public Counsel is separate.
Yes.
Separate.
It's much smaller than staff. I think it's got 12 or 14 employees, for a staff it's got, you know, a couple hundred.
Yeah.
But it's an important distinction.
Yeah, so I have lots of questions, but better than that would be your questions. So was it okay? Yeah. Yes.
What kind of profit margin do these private entities operate on?
Sure, and let me repeat the question. Say for people reporting and living folks, all just at sea or watching. What are the, if I get the question right, what typically are the profit margins of investor-owned and regulated utilities in Missouri or generally?
Yeah, well, you want to take that, Carl?
Well, I was gonna say, for the investor-owned utilities, I'm not sure I can even tell you what Evergy's profit margin is, but all that stuff is filed with the SEC. I can tell you, for example, what the return on equity is that the Public Service Commission gives the utility the opportunity to earn. In the last one we had, I just forgot it, it was, I think it was 8.2% or something like that. But whether they make that, whether they exceed it or they don't make it, or they, who really knows? But that's what the commission can do. If James, when he was public counsel, thought that Evergy, back then, KCP&L was over earning, they could file a complaint case. And on the other hand, if Evergy said, oh my gosh, we need to raise rates because we're losing money, they can come in, but they have to ask permission to that. For munis and co-ops, I'll defer to somebody else because they're not public entities. So, to what the City of Independence is doing, you have to go to your board and your city council and say, look at the city budget.
Yeah.
And if I may, to make sure I'm getting this right. The Service Commission's job is to make sure that power is affordable and reliable.
Yep.
And consumers are protected to some degree. And the utility itself is put in a position where you can, they're not going to guarantee that everybody will make money. They will allow them to put in a position where they can.
Yeah.
About that, right?
Yeah.
Those are the balance.
Yeah, and also it factors in what is the investor utility, like when Evergy builds a wind farm, or builds a solar array, or builds, I mean, they're probably not building a lot of coal plants anymore, but if they're build a coal plant, they do put that money in, they have to build that before before ratepayers even get asked to pay for it. It's gotta be done, it's gotta be in use, it's gotta be considered useful to the ratepayers. And then that's when the utility will come and say, hey, look, we want that money back. Plus we want, some return on that because we had all these investors put money into this. We had all this capital investment into this. And, and they will often ask for an amount. I think there was some smaller utility just last week that asked for a 12% ROE, a water company. I don't think they're going to get that, but I mean, you typically see around the country about 8 to 10% seems to be the going rate right now for that opportunity for an investor on utility.
Can you hear me okay? I'm paranoid, so I'm sorry. Recently, the PSC voted in to mandate the time of day service. And recently, the Missouri legislature had put in a bill to investigate and possibly overturn that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that applies just to Evergy at this point in time. Before the commission came down, it's called time of use rates.
Right.
And what we mean, you pay for what it costs the utility at this time.
Right.
And so when their costs go down, when the sun goes down, and it's nice and cool, everything, your costs will go down. What you're paying right now, if you have time of use rates, would depend on your plan. And if you were not efficient, I mean, your bill would be, well, it's like your gas bill used to be. If your gas bill used to be $150, you weren't on a level payment plan, it could have been $800, $700 during the winter.
I thought it was mandated too for Ameren.
Well, they have the program, but you can opt in
Okay.
to it. With Evergy was asking for it to be opted in, and the Public Service Commission did not believe that the results they were seeing in Ameren were going to be sufficient to change behavior. So they said, well, we want this to be mandatory. That was not anything that any party had really proposed or seen coming.
Is Evergy pushing back on that? Is it instead?
Well, it's final order.
Yeah.
And these are the company's regulators. And when just if I can tell you a short story, when the initial order came out mandating this, in my client's view, it was so poorly written. We had one other issue too, but they moved for reconsideration to say you need to do these things. I mean, they were going to have time of use rates come in June. Well, considering what we've all gone through in July, what we're going through this month, I don't think anybody would have been prepared, for what time of use rates meant. So, they backed off and said, oh, we begin to do this in October, but you've got to have it in by the end of the year. And so, and I'm not an expert in this, but I can just tell you that the technical people, because this is, it takes a lot of accountants and other people to figure out how do we just even charge people for this? And I mean, we can figure out what's going on, but it's controversial, but we feel that our hands are tied because we don't think it was unlawful. I don't think it was illegal. And this is not just a politically correct thing. This, if it's done right, it's going to save everybody costs. So this is not really a left wing or right wing thing, and I know this, I don't know her, but I know the senator who's the majority leader thinks it's, political wokeness. And it really isn't. I mean, time of use rates have been around for 20 years, at least. But when you come to a place like Missouri, which is, we're the show me state, show us this is going to work before you stick it to us. I don't think we're prepared for it.
I have a question about that too. I have another question, about publicly owned utilities rather than invested. But this, since you brought this up, it seems to me that they tried to push thermostats that they can control. Okay, and it didn't seem real popular. Okay, so now they want to mandate time of use energy. They're trying to do the same thing that the public already said we really don't want by not buying into the utility thing. And so I don't understand why they keep. Well, I do. This leads into my next question, or the question I had on publicly owned utilities. Our rates might go up when the city or the independent power line decide to build a new plant or whatever. Okay, but we own that. We pay our monthly bills, but we own the results of the investment. An investor-owned thing, when they build it, like you explained, it has to run everything first, but they own it, and the whole goal is to make a profit off of it. Although the profit is regulated. Because if they didn't make a profit, they wouldn't have investors.
Exactly.
And so the rates keep going up either way. So isn't it better to own the property? The city own it, even though our rates are going, because our rates are going to go up just as much in investor owned because they're trying to make a profit.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think those are all good points. I mean, the first part of your of what you're asking there in regards to the meter. I think Independence Power Line, you had a vote that they said they're not going to have smart metering installed there. Well, Evergy and before Casey, they did a lot of work with getting smart meters out there, which might, there's a tendency to say like, well, when you have those can be maintained and controlled far away, you're spending less money on labor, you're spending less money. I mean, I think there's an efficiency to that, which does allow them to do, which allows them to kind of incorporate this time of use rate. I mean, having that data more available allows them to do this. And I think, one of the good things about time of use rates, and whether it being mandatory or voluntary is, that's a big question. But I do think it does allow, one, for people to have more control over their energy. They can say, hey, look, I don't want to spend a bunch of money between 4 and 8 o'clock, so I'm going to run my dishwasher at 9 o'clock at night, or I'm going to charge my EV like when I'm asleep as opposed to when I get back from work. And I do think there's a lot of advantage to that, and it is kind of almost a free market concept they're introducing into a monopolistic system where you can say like, yes, this is how much this costs at this time. And, and so I should, be able to say like, well, I want to be able to manage that, have a little more control over that. That's one thing that the New Missouri is very keen on, is making sure people know they have control over how they get the power, what kind of power that is. One of the issues I take with Senator O'Loughlin, who has been very vocal about this, she said this is all based on the fact that we have clean energy mandates, which this has nothing to do with. It's fine. Told a reporter this had nothing to do with this. She called me a shill for China on her Facebook post, which I found, in addition to being enormously racist, enormously incorrect.
She's a reporter, she's a senator. She's the senator. Let me put it.
That's it. Yes. Lee Keller did not call me a shill for China. No. So I mean, I do think those things are connected because the data and the information that utilities are able to have more immediately allows them to do that. Now, with the question of, publicly owned utility like IPL versus a investor-owned utility like Evergy. You know, you're talking about, well, this profit margin. I mean, here's what I would say about that. I mean, yeah, your city council has a lot more ability to oversee this, have control over that. But here's the other thing too. It takes a lot of money to run a utility. It takes I mean, you're talking about, like, I think municipal utilities, because of their access to capital, municipal utilities don't have it. They have their rate payers. That's what they have. Right now with the Inflation Reduction Act, they've got some opportunities with the federal government. I want to make sure I get my pitch in for the Inflation Reduction Act because I think it's the most amazing thing the federal government's done in a long time. They have those opportunities with the full government. But the thing is with investor-owned utilities, they have more access to be able to have better delivery systems. They can have better opportunities to generate power. They are able to deal with some of these big challenges that we've got in transmission, and the fact that we are going to be dealing with more extreme weather because let's face it, we do not believe this is going to be just a few random winter storms and a few random heat waves. It's going to have to be something that utility companies are going to have to really deal with, and it's going to be expensive. I mean, Winter Storm Uri, that cold snap that hit in the middle of February of 2021, we're still working on issues with that from over 2.5 years ago. We'll probably be talking about it years from now. I just think that while there are a lot of advantages and disadvantages to both, what I would say is I think that the access to be able to finance those issues. We're just going to have to spend more money to deal with these issues in the future.
I was going to say two things, and my client may not like me to say this, but I think the best thing about a municipal form of governance is that the members of the city council are going to listen to you. This gentleman back here is going to listen to you. The people on who run the utility are going to listen to you, because if you don't like what they're doing, I mean, you're going to change the people. You've got to vote out the city council and the mayor. If you're with an investor-owned utility, you don't have that ability. You can go to a public meeting when they want to raise your rates. The plan, you can go to the public council. But by and large, the key decisions are made by those 5 commissions. Now, I think they've made some good decisions. I think they've made some boneheaded decisions. But you will remove, your power is diluted. That's all I can say. Now, I mean, when my family moved here, when my dad years ago was director of the Truman Library, he didn't come home and say, "Man, I'm so glad I live in Independence, Missouri, because I own a public utility." I mean, I don't even think I knew that when I was in college and high school. And when I got out of the Navy and moved into Kansas City, Missouri, I didn't think, "Oh, this is great. I'm now either a prisoner of Kansas City Power Life." So these are fine distinctions. But on the other hand, I think your voice is going to be heard more in a municipal context than it would be in an investment utility.
You said something about, the concept of paying at time, I forgot what it's called.
Time of use.
Right, you said that's going to save everybody money. And what popped in my head at that time when I read the article about it in the paper was at what cost to the older retired people on fixed income who, it's going to be higher rates, so you won't use as much energy, but you're going to sit in a warmer house. So
it's a complicated thing, and Evergy has proposed, and I think the commission has accepted, there are 4 rate plans, and then there's a default plan. The default plan is the closest to what we have at Evergy right now. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all. You have choices. If you think you're going to be really on the market and manage your energy use, you may want to go for that one that gives you, you will pay the highest rate, between like 4 and 8 p.m. and the lowest rate between, midnight and 6 in the morning or something like that. But if you think, I don't really care about this, or I don't want to manage that, then you'll leave the default rate or, the rate of the other end. But you will have choice. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Answered quite a few questions. Number one one of mine was the citizens having a voice. Number 2 was the smart meters. See that coming in Evergy or something. Because my biggest deal with utilities, basically, I worked on it for 35 years, but T&D manager, but is the reliability. And as I watch these storms come through the Midwest, I see Evergy out here 2 and 3 weeks down the road putting up lines to get these lights on. Independence, it's got one of the best records in the country as far as getting the lights back on and keeping them on. And so I'm just wondering the effect if your thoughts were that they would keep our employees here to keep, that was the case, to keep this place up and running, because you know, the most important thing in the city is the lights are on.
I should be doing a better job of summarizing these questions for the sake of camera posterity, whatever it is. I think try something I was saying. Look, we've got a good system that works pretty well here. You know, because I'm concerned about smart meters and all that, but I think the main thing he was asking was this works here. He was seeing the response to the recent storms, Evergy taking longer to respond than other places. And you know, would an investor-owned utility likely keep IPL's current staff and really maintain the standards, the reliability, and the good service that we have today? What's the track record?
You know, well, if like say an investor-owned utility did, you know, there's if city of Independence wanted to move in that direction, there's got to be a vote for that.
Right.
But then, even if that vote passes, Public Service Commission has to approve of mergers and acquisitions of a utility company. As an example, whenever in this case, you know, they merged with Westar, and that had to be approved by Kansas regulators and Missouri regulators. And in Missouri, the standard is, and the only standard is there, you know, is there not going to be a detriment, you know, is there no net detriment? It's a negative standard. So, you know, so ultimately, you know, you got to say, well, is the public negative? Is there going to, is there going to be an absence of a negative? I'm getting sure they're saying this when you're doing a negative. Is the public going to see anything bad happen as a result of this? Right? That's the standard that the Public Service Commission would have to look at. And you know, ultimately, one of the things that you always hear in mergers and acquisitions is, well, we believe that we can reduce redundancies. We hear that one, and sometimes that means that there's going to be the same work and never you have to be doing that work for another service. And it's just, I think one of the advantages that the not, I don't want to call it an advantage, but I guess what the Public Service Commission would see as an advantage is, yes, it will cost less money to operate this, and that means less people sometimes. But they're not going to do it at the detriment of the public, to the service of the public. I mean, they're not going to be getting rid of, you know, people who are working on lines. They're not going to be doing that to get rid of people who are like doing technical work. And that, I mean, they still have an obligation to make sure that you are getting power delivered, you know, as best possible, and that if you have a disconnection or if there's some sort of issue that's getting restored with.
I guess the only thing I'd say is that, you know, there would be no merger occurring unless you and the city of Independence felt it would be in the best interest of the community to merge with whoever, Evergy or Ameren or somebody else. And the commission typically, when they do approve the mergers, and they have always, you know, I mean, 20 years ago, the old Aquila tried to take over St. Joe Light Power, and that was disapproved. They eventually went back and got them, but when these people are approved, there are usually, there are almost always, you know, performance criteria that have to be fulfilled. There's money set aside for various programs. These are, you know, stringent requirements. Now, after 10 years, who knows how they're going to be? I mean, they're in perpetuity. But the commission typically does require the parties to say, well, if you want to do this, you need to, you know, have these types of protections to maintain, you know, T&D as transmission and distribution. The other thing I'd just say is that, you know, some of this stuff is very local, and you know, I live in Kansas City, Missouri, just 6,000 into Missouri, and there were parts of my neighborhood that were really okay when that last storm came through in July. But you went over to Prairie Village, like a half a mile, and it was a disaster. And so, you know, when you have these localized thunderstorms or ice storms, things like that, it really just depends on where you live. And so I don't know. It's great to hear that Independence is good record, but you know, you need to look at the weather. Obviously, the weather, you know, either out toward Lafayette County versus the other part of the metropolitan area, it could be just an happenstance. you want, the utility, whether it's municipal or investor-owned, has got to provide, assurances of reliability, because if not, I mean, they're gonna get hammered the next time they go to the commission and want to do something. So,
Lucy, you can finish that.
Well, I just wanted to echo what Mr. Huff had to say. It's really disconcerting to me that our power company is so reliable and they're Johnny on the spot when there's a problem. But you look out over on the investor side and you see them adding and adding other projects, but still the same areas. Because I used to be the engineering secretary for KCP&L when we merged with Evergy. So I know exactly what happened to the staff and what happened to not only the union side, but the management side as well. And it was glean. It was glean. So, pardon?
Go ahead.
So, what I'd like to say is that I would be totally opposed to selling IPL because of the reason that we are best provided for by IPL, and I do not feel that any other, including Evergy, would be able to fulfill what we have today. I brought 2 electric bills the last 2 months, and I can show you that my power bill, I missed conservation, are $100 a month for both months with this heat, and that's just my electric bill. So I'm wholeheartedly in support of IPL.
Just to say that the board and Lucy following, and pretty much following what IPL says. Very much wants to keep IPL as it is, reliable service here, good service, and it's affordable, and it's choose to work there. KCP&L is there, which we, other things along as well. Respond to that.
Oh, I mean, one, I just want to say, like, I think that, I'm not here advocating for one position or another. I think that there's good things and bad things about Holt. I mean, just like anything else, there's good things and bad things about it, no matter where you're at. Sometimes you just have to ask yourself, like, to address one problem, are you creating other problems that you're going to have to deal with later? You just have to ask yourself, is it worth that? I mean, the older I get, the more I realize any kind of policy changes or any big shifts in how we do things. There's always going to be something that we have to deal with.
well, and that's a good point. I mean, the big issue that we've seen in Kansas is that, I've forgotten who the manufacturer is now, but they want to come in and build this huge battery plant. Well, that's in that part of Johnson County. It's going to be batteries that'll, drive EV, electric vehicles and all that sort of thing. And some of the people are saying, well, how come you didn't set aside money to pay the utility to build the infrastructure for that? Well, the law prevents that. You've got to either spend the money up front and then you got to go to the Kansas Corporation Commission to get it back. But to your point, in Independence, I mean, it's great that you're reliable now, that you like your service. But to the extent that somebody like was it Toshiba or whoever it is, I forgot who it is, Panasonic. To the extent Panasonic thinks, oh my gosh, I'll never get this past the city council and Independence. I mean, that would be unfortunate if you had the square footage someplace to put a plant to provide workers and stimulate your economy. But those, as James said, those are the trade-offs, and they're different.
Well, we did get it passed to the city council with North Point. And they are going to be a blessing to our electric system.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you're seeing with battery manufacturers, I think with some of this new clean energy stuff coming, I know there's a lot of challenges with that, but I mean, it is going to be a real boom for manufacturing jobs. It is going to really, I think, offer some economic advantages. I know there are challenges when, we talk about like environmental advocacy and we talk about batteries, you have to look at where that material is coming from and where that, look, again, there's no easy way to make energy. There's no easy way to consume. Other than moving out to the woods and living in dirt, I'm not really sure what options we have. I like my house. So I'm not going to be moving anywhere, but I do believe that we are going to keep, addressing these challenges and we're going to start seeing a lot of improvements with it. But it is, like with that situation with Panasonic, with that is going to have such a demand on its utility. That's just going to be one of those things that we're going to see, because I think you're going to see a lot more manufacturing like that. Manufacturing, and I tell you, Yeah, there's an aluminum smelter in southeast Missouri that for a time being, it was called Miranda. It's still run under a different name now, but it was taking up 10% of the power that Ameren on the eastern side of the state was providing. It was using about as much power as the city of Springfield used on a daily basis. That's an amazing amount of energy that's being consumed. So it's just going to be one of those things we're dealing with.
So I want to respect people's time and really talking about here fairly soon. The council's time on that, and then it runs, because we got something to stop it. And if we, I've got one on that. We'll keep with the council, understand.
Thank you. People are always interested in rates and, you know, up and down, they're always concerned about it. So can you all talk about, can you compare the last 10 years of rate increases at Evergy versus IPL and address the issue that, you know, that Evergy had I think a hold on rate increases for 4 years when they acquired Westar. And then what's happened since that time.
So just for the sake, rates, IPL versus Evergy the last 10 years, and more specifically, when Evergy became Evergy, the Westar, they had to agree with one. Well, I'm just getting that today. The rate freeze was not a product of the merger. The rate freeze on the Missouri side is a product of the new statute that I won't go into. But in exchange for getting certain favorable treatment for investing in infrastructure, they had to cap their rates for 4 years. In terms of IPL versus Evergy, I thought Evergy Missouri West, which is the old Aquila, was lower than IPL. I just forgot about Evergy, what do you call it? Metro, KCPL. But because Evergy Metro owns more plants, their rates tend to be higher. You're paying for it. But the bad thing for old Aquila, Evergy Missouri West, is when Winter Storm Uri, Winter Storm Elliott come in, and the wholesale price of electricity is high, they have to go into the market and pay high prices because of the demand for power. So it's a trade-off. You know, the rates were a little bit lower, and I just can't comment. I think that's just what I read the last time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that right with the merger, that was just timing, and I think it appeared that was a freeze there. I know Liberty Empire, when they got acquired, they did agree to a 5-year moratorium. Pretty close to end. I think it's over now. And so, yeah, I mean, I've never really done the comparison. And it is tricky because Evergy has 2 separate rates in 2 different parts of their service territory, which is hard to explain.
Well, they're 2 different corporations.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. But they're still called Evergy.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, it's 3. You got Westar, and that's still a corporation. You got Evergy up here, okay? But you've got Westar, you've got Legacy KCP&L that's called Evergy Metro. And then you still got Aquila. That is still under its new name.
Evergy GMO. It's Greater Missouri Operations. Yeah, Evergy GMO. I worked for Evergy for 10 years as well. So,
but now it's called Evergy Missouri West.
Yeah.
You know, so you've actually got 3 electric utilities that are owned by the holding company that we all call Evergy. So,
can you address the second part though? Now that the 4-year hold is over, what's happened to the rates since?
For Evergy?
Well, we had a rate case that came down in December with this time of use. All the rate issues were settled.
Yeah.
And I think the rates are pretty much the way they have been. There was other issues on the time of use and on another issue I wanted to get in, but that was settled in Public Counsel and the staff. So I think the return on equity is still this 8.2% that it's been for 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also the other thing too that you got to keep in mind with rate cases is like the way if you have a rate increase or a rate decrease, sometimes it's applied to different customers differently. Residential customers, it's kind of treated differently as opposed to a commercial or industrial, and we call that a rate design. And that's another second half of a rate case where you say what kind of customer is going to pay this kind of rate. So that's when those things get really tricky.
Just two things. We haven't talked about co-ops. I'm hoping you could just, and actually, you might advance your, show the pictures.
There's one slide.
Yeah, well, no, the slide that shows a different, well, co-ops, but the other investor-owned one.
Oh, the big map of Missouri, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So can you talk about co-ops and how they are distinguishable from municipal utilities and or investor owned? And then secondly, can you talk about the securitization and stranded assets, particularly as it applies to 50% of our power is generated from purchase of Iatan 2 and Nebraska City 2, and these are long-term contracts. And so that concept, because I'm not so sure it's one that's gets discussed much.
So rural electric cooperatives are authorized by federal law. We have 43 co-ops operating in the state of Missouri. Black Clay is probably the closest one to this area. It was designed to reach into areas, rural areas where privately owned utilities did not see a lot of incentive to be there for monetary reasons. So that was passed in 1936. They are governed by each one of those little co-ops has a board of directors. They are the ones who make decisions about rates. They are the ones who make decisions about how power is acquired. It is not regulated by the Public Service Commission. It is generally not very transparent, in my opinion. You have a lot of decisions that get made that don't get a lot of public input. But the idea is that your neighbors are on this board, and they should be able to do that. They all buy their power from a company based in Springfield that generates that power. They have 2 coal plants in Missouri. They've got a wind farm. They've got some natural gas generation. They provide power to eastern Oklahoma, all of Missouri, and part of Southern Iowa. They historically have not been very reliant on renewable energy. From my perspective, we have really fought for the Inflation Reduction Act to be able to give them opportunity to do so, because a lot of their money comes from the USDA. They borrow money from the feds, from the USDA, and they pay it back, and that's where they get a lot of their financing. They do not get money from investors. They do not get. They typically that's where they get the money to build plants. So that's really that's what I consider co-ops. That helps.
Brad, what was your question on securitization?
Well, the stranded assets that you're hearing, securitization. We have two long-term purchase power agreements with Iatan 2 and Nebraska City 2, and so the future of the economics of coal.
Okay, well, the securitization law in Missouri has 2 parts.
Okay.
One is if you have an extraordinary event like Winter Storm Uri or Nelly, you can securitize those costs. And I'm representing Evergy, Missouri West, who got hit on this. We're trying to take that bill and securitize it, which is just a short form of making it into a bond to get everybody the lowest possible rate to pay for those power costs. The other one is if you want to retire a coal plant, replace with a renewable energy plant or some kind of new plant. And Empire is trying to do that, and Amber may try to do that with Rhode Island. But what securitization doesn't really have anything to do with like purchase power agreements. And I would think Iatan 1 or Iatan 2 are probably going to be retired real soon. And that's probably 10, 12 years in the future, it's that. Something like that. But that's just, it's a means to try to get you even a lower rate than what you get through the rural utility service, which James was, that's the Department of Agriculture to give co-ops extremely favorable rates.
Yeah. So, yeah. Securitization only applies to the investor-owned utilities, and I guess if you're talking about Iatan or something that's owned by an investor-owned utility, they have that option. So they're not required for them to do it, but if they're looking at doing it anyway, it's a good opportunity to make that easier and have less of a burden on ratepayers. That's one of the reasons why we supported that legislation in the past. We saw it as a good opportunity to not cause as much economic damage, to shut those down when they literally got all that negotiation that's still in them when they're trying to close them early.
So unless Brent and his head and what the other one probably are about, perhaps a good conversation. I would like to leave folks with thought coming out of here, as we go forward, the independence looks at what it's going to do for months, or put before the voters for a couple of years regarding against marijuana. I live in Missouri, where I'm both investor and customer. And we look at this, so we're hearing a lot of conversation, a lot of trade-offs. So we have to make, what are the 3 or 4 things that people, the residents should keep in mind as this conversation goes forward, to make sure that the city council there.
Well, I mean, the 2 things are, you know, your rates and your reliability. I mean, how much are you paying for what you're getting? Is it reasonable? And is it reliable? And, you know, if you think your rates are reasonable and you think you've got good service and it's reliable, there's probably not a good reason to make a major change. But on the other hand, I mean, I was just looking at the responses to the request for proposal by these 2 firms. And I mean, getting their input, and those are 2 very different firms. I think your city council knows that. I mean, one is, it might be very heavily populated by engineers. The other one's got like twice as many people from, you know, public policy and economists and everything else. And I know a couple of those people, and they're good people, but you know, and one says, no, you need to sell, and the other one says, no, you need to continue. Maybe you need to get somebody to hire to look at each of those are saying and give you, you know, an unbiased opinion at a cap cost. But those are the 2 things. I mean, it's you know, are you getting good service for what you're paying for? And it's reliable. That's all.
So things like smart meters, the mix of sources, those are important that they are saying. In your view, it's rates and reliability.
Well,
that's actually
yeah, I mean, you know, and I've had, you know, one of the automatic meters on my house, and it's, you know, it's really good if you want to get on the Energy website and see what's going on. But it should be there to support, you know, your knowledge to make those 2 decisions about, am I paying for something that's reliable at a reasonable rate? Those are the 2 tests.
Well, seems to me there's one other thing, is the long-term outlook.
Well, but that's reliability. When we talk about reliability, we don't talk about reliability just today. We talk about it, you know, the Public Service Commission says we want to see your plans for at least the next 10 years.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
James,
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm gonna take my renewable energy hat off for a second and say, like, you know, the reliability issue. You know, you all belong to the Southwest Power, right? Like you know, when you're in a pinch, you gotta, like, you know, be able to say, like, well, someone out there might be producing power that we can use. But there's trade-offs to that. You gotta make your own power too, right? I mean, that's one of the requirements. It is expensive for a municipal utility to do that. Whether it is coal, whether it's gas, whether it's solar, whatever it is.
What about nuclear, small nuclears?
Well, okay, so modular nuclear devices. I mean, okay, so you want to talk about expensive. I mean, right now we do not have technology for small modular nuclear devices. We're probably about, I think I've heard 2030, 2031, 2032. I don't know how much that's. I know that when you have a big nuclear power plant, those are really expensive. And in fact, I mean, every state that builds a nuclear power plant has to have a system where they charge customers as they're being built. And you've got situations like, say, in South Carolina, where there's a $4 billion hole in the ground, there's no nuclear power there, and in Georgia, they just put a nuclear power plant online that is 6 years over schedule, about double its budget.
But we're talking smaller than that.
And I mean, I really do hope, like, and that's the thing too, because I do not think nuclear power, you know, for someone who's like, I don't want to see us burn a bunch of stuff in the air, I think nuclear is really good, right? I mean, the waste is one issue. But you know, before we tried to build big nuclear power plants, we tried to do these small plants, and they were expensive then. That was the 1950s. Maybe we have developed some technology, and I'm not an engineer. I'm just one of these, you know, I'm just, you know, this guy kind of stumbled into all of this. You know, maybe there's a way to do that in a cost-effective way. I believe that if there's a cost-effective way of doing it, and it's an option for utility companies to put those where we have retired coal plants, and you can have that, you know, it's already connected to the grid. You can do that. I think that's great. I don't know what that's going to look like in the end. I don't know how much of an option that would be for a municipal utility as an example. Maybe it would be a great opportunity. I just don't know. We're still a little far ahead on that. Just like I still think battery storage is a great opportunity. Now you're seeing a lot of that work being done in California at the utility scale level. And Evergy in their last rate case just got permission to do some work with not only utility scale batteries, but also putting residential batteries, systems in people's homes and seeing how that can work for them. We were very supportive of that. We want to see that work and we're very excited about that. And, you know, maybe that's an option. Maybe that changes how we look at things in 7 or 8 years. Same way that a small nuclear modular system will change things in 7 or 8 years. It's hard to say.
So if I may, the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah.
Next 1 or 2 years, what are those couple, 3 things that people really are thinking?
I think the question is how much do you want to spend on generating your own power to keep this place running? Because I think it's a lot of money for us. This way utility doesn't have a lot of big customers. I mean, you know, like you have, I mean, I don't know what your manufacturing footprint here is in Independence, but it's tough unless you have anchor customers. It's tough to run a utility. Everybody's got a lot of manufacturing and it's still tough.
Other challenges, very complex conversations. Coming up on 1 o'clock. Good turnout. Thank you for coming. Let's give it up for the folks in the energy.
Yeah.
I want to thank Andy for coming here today.
And nothing for the box for the moderator.
Okay.